Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Today we're starting a new playlist on the channel. This is going to be one which just involves me and my thoughts on the House of the Dragon book, Fire and Blood, and the show that's coming up. Now, with that said, this playlist came about through a lot of people starting to ask me questions or prodding me towards reading Martin's work. And I finally gave in and decided to buy on my Kindle Fire and Blood and give it a good thorough read. I'm going to be generally trying to do a entire chapter's analysis per video and as quickly as possible. One last disclaimer. I am by no means a fan of George R. R. Martin's work. I actually really did not enjoy almost any of his Game of Thrones books, as I found them too derivative of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and honestly found Dragonbone Chair better written than Game of Thrones and A Sword of Storms. That said, if you prefer those books, more power to you. If you prefer Martin, more power to you. Good on you. I support you. Do what you want. It has no bearing on me. With that said, let's get on to my analysis. In Martin's universe, Aegon the First, he would conquer the Seven Kingdoms, except for Dorne, around a year or two before the year of the conquest, because it took him 2 years to conquer everything. It's about year 2 to 1 BC before conquest that he conquered everything. And his ancestor, Aegon Targaryen, sold all of his holdings in the freehold and in the lands of the Long Summer 12 years before the Doom of Valyria. He sold everything in year 114 because his daughter, Daenerys the Dreamer, foretold that Valyria would fall. And the next century was the century of blood. The Targaryens are stated to have looked to the east, not west. Aegon was born in 27 BC. Now, he's the second child because his sister Visenya is older, and he was bonded to Balerion, the Black Dread, the oldest of the dragons, with Vhagar and Meraxes being the lesser dragons, and they bonded to Visenya and Rhaenys, respectively. Aegon would end up visiting alongside Visenya, Old Town, Arbor, and possibly Lannisport. Harren the Black and Argilac were the nearest kings to Aegon's lands. It'd be Argilac who would kind of instigate Aegon into conquest, offering him his daughter and the entire Blackwater Rush to the Trident region as part of her dowry, which it stated in the text that those were not his lands to give as dower lands for his daughter, Argella. Although, that said, I would argue it was certainly his to give if they should conquer it together, as this sort of deal has come up several times in history. That said, the fact of the matter is, Aegon also reacted with a great deal of offense, claiming he already has 2 wives. He could not take a third, and then proceeded to offer up his half-brother, Orys Baratheon's hand to Argella. It's stated that Argilac flew into a rage over this, although quite why is beyond me. Now, it's relying on this weird pop culture mentality that illegitimate children were considered insults to every person in the culture, which I don't quite understand what Martin has against illegitimacy. He seems to really have a boner for that. Hate on. Now, historically, illegitimate children in the Roman period were frequently treated as legitimate citizens. At one point, the Senate even ruled that when they found an entire colony's worth of illegitimate children of soldiers, to be sent off to found a new city. In terms of illegitimate children throughout the history of France, Scotland, and even England, illegitimate children serving in high-profile military and aristocratic positions, and even within the clergy. So this is not historical. This is purely Martin. I don't pretend to understand why he built his world this way. I guess he just decided to make things very different from the historical. We'll have to go with what he's kind of ordained in his series. Now, it takes 7 days for his flock of ravens to go all over Westeros, demanding that everyone surrender and acknowledge him as king. I don't really have too many thoughts on that. Now, for one thing, historically, messengers were sent by horse, not by birds, although this is an interesting twist. It's used frequently in Game of Thrones, which, okay. That said, the number of Aegon's forces, they are somewhere between 3,000 and a few hundred. The book is not certain. I would lean towards a few hundred, as the islands in question upon which the Targaryens and their vassals, the Valerians and Celtigars live on, don't seem to have a large enough population to supply 3,000 soldiers. They might have a population of 3,000 in total, but I don't think they'd have 3,000 men at arms. And even if you draft the men and the fishermen and whatnot, I don't think you'd be able to come up with that number. Just looking at the map. The fort that Aegon builds when he lands in Westeros. The exact location seems to be where the city from Game of Thrones is, King's Landing. There he builds a log and earth palisade fortress called Aegon Fort. At least it's called that first. Later, it's renamed Aegon's High Hill. Now we get to the War of Conquest, which is based off of 1066 with Guillaume le Conquérant, or William the Conqueror, as the English know him. There are massive differences from the historical records, but I'm not going to get into the history. Not too much. Rosby, a lord, would yield to Rhaenys and Meraxes, but it'd be Visenya who'd secure victory against the castle of Stokeworth by setting the roof on fire. Mooton, Maidenpool, and Darkland Duskendale would join their forces to defy Aegon, who would whip out Balerion, set those 2 men and 3,000 men on fire, demonstrating his cruelty. The new lords would submit, and Visenya would claim their riches, showing a great deal more restraint when she took the city and its treasury. Now, the next bit that the chapter gets into is the nature of the sisters, in that Rhaenys was playful, liked her minstrels and whatnot, but she also liked to cheat on Aegon, which fits with Martin's literature that everybody seems to cheat, or at least most characters at some point cheat or break their word in terms of marriage and engagements. That said, it stated that Aegon preferred Rhaenys and preferred to pass more time with her and in her bed than Visenya. But still, I can't help but think that's hinted that Rhaenys' children of Aegon were not really his children, and that I don't think it's the Maesters blackening a reputation, as Martin's never written a book, so we only have his universe's record of them. Now, that said, I think we can safely say Visenya might be the one who bore a legitimate child, but in looking at themes and ideas and whatnot, and given the troubles that Aegon initially had with Duskendale when it didn't surrender, her slipping in illegitimate children also matches the other great conqueror of Westeros, Robert Baratheon's marriage to Cersei Lannister. I'm just going to look at it in terms of themes, and that Martin implies, as she's not a warrior and she liked arts and whatnot. Women in Martin's literature tend to be either nuts, they tend to sleep around a lot, or they're all tomboys. Not that it matters, considering Martin has his Targaryens practice loads and loads of incest, so ew. Now, as for Orys Baratheon, him and the sisters and Daemon Valerian and Tristan Massey and Crispin Celtigar are the small council of Aegon. Orys becomes Hand of the King, which is a title taken from Tad Williams' Dragonbone Chair. Just a little detail I'm throwing in there. But Orys Baratheon is really the guy running the show, as are the sisters. Aegon only gets involved in what he considers important things, probably matters of foreign affairs and whatnot, and dragons. So it doesn't seem like he's the one running the administration. It'd be Visenya who would crown Aegon with a crown of steel and rubies, and all the kings, though, would end up deciding to defy Aegon, except for Stark, who seems to have hesitated rather than immediately reach for his sword or to go cry to a neighbor like the Lord of the Reach did with the Westerlands. Torrhen Stark seems to have hesitated, decided to consult with his lords, and Torrhen Stark seems to have been a generally weak ruler, uncertain of himself and of the threat he's facing. That said, given that it's dragons, not going to judge too much. Aegon, though, would suffer massive casualties when he'd go to war with Harren the Black. He would require Rhaenys to save him because he'd be ambushed twice. How he did not win the battle immediately with his dragon, I'm not sure. Now, Harren the Black, 2 of his sons, snuck in behind him. Meanwhile, Edmund Tully, the Lord of Riverrun, ancestor to boatloads of characters from the Game of Thrones series, against Harren the Black, he would revolt in the name of Aegon, raising his banner and proclaiming his allegiance to Aegon, and rallying a great deal of the river lords to Aegon's cause. This action of lowering the standard of the king he no longer wants and raising a new king whom he hopes to probably get a better deal out of, who he thinks might be a better administrator and liege lord, was a practice that did happen in the Middle Ages, undeniably. If you look at, for example, the lords of Burgundy, Burgonde in French history, they would occasionally raise the banners of the English or the German Holy Roman Emperors when defying their actual liege lords, the French monarchs. Typically, this happened with the likes of Charles Le Fou or Charles the Mad. You had Charles VII, who had to go through it. He was the king who received aid from Jeanne d'Arc. You've got Louis XI, the Spider King. That said, Harren the Black is burnt to death because he refused to surrender. Orys ends up fighting against Argilac, who refuses to surrender as well. He's killed for this in battle, although Orys is stated to have wanted to show mercy to him. Then you have Argilla, who is captured by her guards when she tries to defy the Targs, and she's handed over naked to Orys. This was not really common practice, so she was obviously violated by the guards before she was handed over. Him showing chivalry? I don't know. Maybe the character didn't. I lean towards him not doing it. Mern, the Gardener King, and Lauren Lannister would unite their forces and they'd be massacred in the Fields of Fire, where Mern's entire house was burnt and Lauren was safely out of range of the fire. Now, the only thing of note, really, of this battle is that Tyrell would claim the Reach afterwards when they'd surrender, and Lauren would just immediately surrender. As to Visenya, she's suffered an arrow wound in this battle. Now, as for this battle, I kind of lean towards it having been arranged. If Aegon had met with Lauren in Lannisport, he very likely reached a deal with Lauren Lannister. Torrhen, though, would surrender after his half-brother Brandon would try to offer to go kill the dragons in the night. A rather stupid suggestion, considering they don't have the means to kill the dragons. So basically, he offered to go kill himself, and Torrhen told him no, and decided to negotiate his own surrender. Visenya conquered the Vale by a dragon ride to the son of the regent of the Vale. That said, there's a tendency to repeat the theme of the child ruler over the Vale in Martin's universe. Rhaenys, though, would go to take Dorne, but she'd find a lot of empty forts, Dornish nobles having abandoned their people for caverns, and she becomes a glorified messenger, not having the wherewithal to just take out the Dornish princess when she had the chance. As to the High Tower, he surrenders after a few days of meditation and prayer, but it's obvious this was a foregone conclusion. I think Hightower did end up inviting Aegon in. He offers to anoint the new king rather quickly, and I don't think the faith is quite mad yet until the Lord Hightower offers his youngest daughter's hand to Aegon. Now, earlier Aegon said, I already have 2 wives, I can't take another one, in response to Argilac. But now he says he's afraid of offending his sisters. So the motivation has changed, and the reaction seems to have changed. But now he reacts hesitantly, as though he considered the offer. So he considered it. So obviously, this might have been what was the plan. Maybe the Hightowers had hoped to control Aegon, but he does not prove a pliable king, so they begin to scheme against him. I also think that it's very likely that they had hoped for Old Town, their city, to be the capital, but Aegon goes on to found King's Landing and doesn't do that. As for my thoughts, depending on how well this video does, I'll keep reading. That said, no character really impressed me except for maybe Visenya. She strikes me as the most determined of her siblings, almost as though she's the power behind Aegon, who seems to be a poor general. You have a dragon, how do you fall for a trap? But she is also the go-to woman for all solutions and problems. She seems to be the best fighter alongside Orys Baratheon. That said, I wonder if it's maybe Visenya who pushed Aegon to conquer Westeros. She was the one who really looked west, and Aegon's just a front man for her. I don't know. It's very likely he's not. He's the man in control of his own destiny, to a large extent, but his sister does stiffen his backbone a lot. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to burn that like and that subscribe button like you're a dragon immolating its victims.